There is a moment in your life you don't remember, but your heart has been repeating it ever since. A moment from childhood, quiet and small, that shaped the way you love, trust, speak, hide, and protect yourself today. You may not think your childhood hurt you, but your patterns, fears, and reactions tell a different story. This is the childhood wound you never noticed. Some wounds don't come from dramatic events. They come from the moments when you needed something simple, and it wasn't there. Maybe you needed comfort. Maybe you needed to be seen. Maybe you needed someone to stay. But instead, you learned to stay strong, stay silent, or stay small. Your childhood wounds started here. In the difference between what you needed and what you received. Many people assume trauma requires pain, shouting, or chaos. But some of the deepest wounds come from emotional absence. When nobody taught you how to deal with fear, you learned to hide it. When nobody listened to your thoughts, you learned to swallow them. When nobody understood your sadness, you learned to pretend you were fine. You don't remember these moments clearly, but your nervous system remembers everything. Maybe as a child, you cried alone in a room because no one came. Maybe you grew up too fast because you had no choice. Maybe you were praised only when you behaved well, stayed quiet, or made yourself useful. Maybe you felt responsible for the emotions of the adults around you. And so, little by little, you learned that your needs were a burden. That belief did not disappear. It simply grew up with you. Now, as an adult, you apologize too quickly. You fear disappointing people. You avoid conflict even when you're hurt. You don't ask for help even when you're drowning. You hate the feeling of being too much. You hide the deepest parts of yourself because you're afraid no one will handle them gently. This is how childhood wounds survive. Not in your memories, but in your habits. Some people develop the wound of invisibility. As children, they were overlooked, ignored, or overshadowed. Now, as adults, they feel like background characters in their own life. They don't speak up, even when they need to. They settle for less than they deserve. They feel unimportant, not because they are, but because once, a long time ago, nobody noticed them. Others carry the wound of abandonment. This doesn't only happen when someone physically leaves. It happens when a parent is emotionally unavailable, too busy, too angry, too tired, too distracted. The child learns. Love is something that disappears. Now, they cling too tightly or avoid attachment altogether. Another wound is the wound of rejection. Children who grew up being criticized, mocked, or compared learn to see themselves as flawed. Now, as adults, they fear judgment. They fear expressing ideas. They push love away before they can be rejected. They hide their real personality because they're scared it one day they accept it. For some, the wound is inconsistency. Some days were peaceful. Some days were storms. Some days brought affection. Others wrought silence or anger. The child never knew what version of home they would come back to. Now, they panic when relationships feel uncertain. They overthink messages. They assume the worst. They feel unsafe unless they are constantly alert. And for many, the wound is perfection. As children, they were praised only when they performed well, behaved perfectly, or succeeded. They learned that love must be earned. Now, they push themselves endlessly. They hide their failures. They judge themselves harshly. They burn out quietly, believing rest is something they must deserve first. Whatever your wound is, it didn't start with a dramatic moment. It started with a lonely one. Your childhood wound shows up in subtle ways. You freeze when someone raises their voice. You over-explain to avoid misunderstanding. You hide your sadness so you won't worry anyone. You stay in unhealthy environments because leaving feels scarier than suffering. You struggle to trust calmness because calm never lasted before. These reactions aren't personality traits. They're survival strategies that protected a child who had no power. Your childhood wound keeps repeating itself because your mind is trying to make sense of it. Your brain recreates familiar patterns, hoping to fix them. You're drawn to people who feel like your past, not because it's good for you, but because it feels known. You repeat the same emotional stories, even when they hurt. You carry the same fears, even when life is different now. The wound continues until it is seen, until someone tells you, this wasn't your fault. Healing begins when you understand that your reactions today once kept you safe. Your silence protected you from conflict you couldn't handle. Your independence protected you from disappointment. Your perfection protected you from criticism. Your emotional numbness protected you from overwhelm. Your childhood wound is not a weakness. It's a story of how strong you had to become. But now, you're no longer that child. You have choices you never had back then. You can speak, even if your voice shakes. You can rest without earning it. You can say no without guilt. You can feel emotions without apology. You can let people in slowly, at your own pace. You can learn that safety doesn't require silence. Healing doesn't mean erasing your wound. It means understanding it so deeply that it no longer controls you. You heal when you stop blaming yourself for the things you were too young to understand. You heal when you stop repeating the patterns that were created for survival, not happiness. You heal when you let yourself receive what you once learned to live without. Care, attention, comfort, patience, gentleness, understanding. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is accepting that you deserved these things all along, that nothing was wrong with you, that everything you needed was simple, human, and reasonable. You weren't too much. You weren't dramatic. You weren't needy. You were a child asking for connection in the only ways you knew how. The childhood wound you never noticed is not your identity. It is simply the place where you were left alone too long. And now, as an adult, you don't have to leave yourself there anymore. You can choose differently. You can choose gentleness. You can choose rest. You can choose boundaries. You can choose relationships that feel safe. You can choose to protect your heart without locking it away. You can choose to give yourself what no one taught you to receive. The love, attention, and understanding you needed from the beginning. Your past wrote the first chapters of your story, but you decide how the rest is written. Healing starts when you finally turn around. Look at that younger version of yourself and whisper, I see you now. You're not alone anymore.